I have this theory that I think we have a biological reaction to stories in the same way that we have to music. There's a reason why the Bible didn't just say, just do these things. There's a reason why they put them in story, right? Because it's far more impactful to listen to this story. And I wonder if through osmosis, the behavior in the stories kind of get locked into our long-term memory, where if you just tell someone a rule, it's short-term and then might be fleeting.
Well, the thing about having the rule embodied in the story is you see how it's acted out. That's much more convincing to watch how something's acted out, partly because then you also know how to act it out, right? If it's just a rule, you have to translate the rule into action. But if it's a story, then the actions are laid out for you. Hello to everyone who's watching and listening on YouTube and on the podcast platforms. I'm speaking today with comedian Andrew Schulz, who's also an actor, producer, and podcaster. One of the biggest and most influential names in comedy today, the business-savvy Schulz has been credited with helping to spur democratization in comedy. He has proven that comics looking to retain ownership of their material by self-releasing on platforms like YouTube can achieve equal or greater success, both financially and in terms of the building of an audience, in comparison to those who strike deals with streamers or networks. Schulz recently sold more than 150,000 tickets as part of his 10-month sold-out Infamous tour, which he capped off by selling out the 6,000-seat Radio City Music Hall in New York twice. He premiered his subsequent special, Infamous, exclusively via the live streaming social media platform Moment House in July, before releasing it for free on YouTube, where you can watch it as I did this morning. While Schulz has self-released multiple specials, including his first titled 441 in 2017, he's also managed to find success through more conventional channels, having created, written, performed, and executive produced the 4-part comedy special Schulz Saves America for Netflix in 2020. The next project he's involved in as an actor is Kenya Barris's remake of the classic streetball comedy White Men Can't Jump for 20th Century Studios, which has him sharing the screen with Laura Harrier. He will also appear in Netflix romantic comedy You People, toplined by Eddie Murphy. That must be a thrill for him. Jonah Hill and Julia Louis-Dreyfus, which Barris will direct from his and Hill's script. Schulz will then rejoin Barris for MGM's sports comedy Underdogs, alongside Snoop Dogg, so there'll be a lot of marijuana involved in that. Past credits on the TV side include HBO's Crashing, Prime Video's Sneaky Pete, and IFC's Benders. Schulz's podcast, Flagrant, is listened to by 2 million devout fans weekly. He also co-hosts Brilliant Idiots with Charlemagne the God. Looking forward to talking to Andrew.
I'm ready. Let's do it, man.
All right.
Also, my mom discovered you this week, so she's an absolutely huge fan. And she says hello, and she would be furious if I didn't say hello for her.
What's your mom's name?
Sandra Cameron Schulz.
Aha. Well, say hello to her for me. And I'm really impressed that it only took her a week to become a huge fan. It's always good to know that someone's mom likes me.
Yeah.
So tell me about your YouTube special and how that came about. You decided not to stream it. You put it on YouTube instead. So I want to know the whole story. How'd that come about?
Okay, so short version of the story is I was originally going to do it with a streamer, right? And then they were unhappy with some jokes. I think the climate changed a little bit, and they were quite concerned how the jokes could reflect on the brand, which is reasonable. I think that a private corporation has the right to make those decisions for themselves, and then see how things go for them after that. Now, sometimes those decisions could be the wrong ones. You could maybe become too woke in your content and then end up losing money. But
no, that could never happen. Too woke? How could that possibly be? Too woke for comedy?
Yeah.
I can't even imagine that's a thing.
No, but okay, side note, I want to get back to the special, but there is something interesting that I've learned from being in in Hollywood a little bit more now is that like, I used to have the perception, I think we all create these perceptions where it's like, there's this like group of organized individuals that are like coming together and making decisions on like what is palatable and what isn't palatable, and then inserting those into culture in their like different fields, like Hollywood, one of them. Okay, all the movies this year are going to be about non-binary or whatever it is. And after being in it a little bit more, I think that it's way less organized and more about self-preservation. So it's like, how do I not lose my job?
Big government continues to spend borrowed money, inflation continues to swell, dragging down our economy, and the stock market has entered bear territory. So what's your plan? Are your assets diversified? I'm Philip Patrick, precious metals specialist for the Birch Gold Group. For nearly 20 years, we've helped Americans diversify into gold, and we can help you too. Did you know you can own physical gold and silver in a tax-sheltered account? We can help you transfer an IRA or 401k tied to stocks into an IRA in gold. If you're skeptical about the trajectory of the economy in the US dollar, then text Jordan to 989898. Birch Gold Group will send you a free info kit on securing your savings with gold. With thousands of satisfied customers, 5-star reviews, and an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau, we take precious metals seriously. Text Jordan to 989898 for your free info kit.
Well, I worked with middle managers for a long time when I was selling personnel evaluation technology to corporations. And I did that for about 10 years, rather unsuccessfully. We found one company that used them extensively. But I learned very rapidly there that the fundamental motivation of virtually every middle manager in a corporation is, how can I not get blamed if something goes wrong?
Yes.
That's it, man.
Yeah.
There's no ambition. There's no desire to grow the company. There's nothing but, I don't want to stick out. If there's a mistake, I don't want it to be on me. I hope I don't get blamed for anything. I'm not going to do anything dangerous ever. And yeah. And the idea that people are organized enough to have a conspiracy is that's just so rarely the case.
But I was part of that belief a little bit, because you see it and it looks so obvious. You're like, why is every single movie the same? Every single TV show the same? Are they having the same values? But then after, like I had a moment on a show a while ago where a guy got fired, a white older man got fired because he read the N-word. Like he read the script and it had the N-word in it. And like the whole cast was kind of like, well, the people I spoke to on the cast, even the black people in the cast were like, yeah, I don't think it's that offensive. But the companies involved were thinking what the middleman was thinking, what you just said, which was, okay, I don't want to be responsible for this. How do I get this blame off of me? Okay, maybe if we just remove this person, it'll be a sign that we care about the people that are here and we don't want them to be offended, etc. Now, I don't believe that the guy did it out of malice. And the black people I spoke to on the cast were like, yeah, I don't think he was being malicious at all. But it was one of those things where everybody was fighting for the ability to continue working, and they didn't want to take that responsibility. And because of that, they made a very woke decision. Yeah. So now it made, you know what I'm saying? It made me look at the industry a little differently. Like everybody, it's like maybe the more desired the job is, the more willing the middle managers will be to be extremely liberal in their values so they don't lose that opportunity. I don't think that exists on a construction site, because the guys there are like, look, I can get a job doing drywall somewhere else. So I'm going to say whatever the fuck jokes I want to say on this construction site.
So I think too, though, there's a complicating factor there, which is it's something like this. So, each of us carries a representation of systems of ideas in our imagination, in our mind. And those ideas are active within us. That's one way of thinking about it. And nobody is a 100% repository of all woke ideas. But so there's fragments of the woke net of ideas in any given individual. But if you get 20 people who have fragments of those ideas in their head all together in a room, then you have the whole goddamn woke catastrophe operating, and then it'll look like a conspiracy. And then you can take 20 different people, each of whom have fragments of the woke nonsense in their head, and put them in a different room. They'll come up with the same decisions. There are these webs of ideas that, and in some sense, each of us acts as a neuron in a neuronal web when we're together in a group. And so then things look conspiratorial, but it's a consequence of the working out of the internal logic of systems of ideas. And so, and then it might be that each individual actor is fundamentally only concerned with not being held accountable for ever making any kind of mistake, which is a hell of a way to live your life. Certainly no way to live your life if you're a comedian or a man for that matter. Maybe not even a woman, not even.
Yeah.
That should make me popular.
It was an interesting thing for me to see how it kind of manifested. And I think that there is like an opposite version of that, because now I've seen like the conservative woke pop up. Are you familiar with this?
What are you referring to?
I don't even know if I call it the conservative woke. It's a really interesting thing. I would almost call it like the counterculture brigade, which is like people who I think they were called conspiracy theorists, and now they're kind of like searching for a home. I think a lot of the support for Kanye even right now is he's just tapping into very niche beliefs, and a bunch of them at the same time that people have no representation for. And now he's the most famous person tapping into those groups, right? So he's like George Floyd really died of fentanyl. And now all the people that are anti-Black Matter, Black Lives Matter, they just hate the idea that there's anything else that killed him but his own choice to do fentanyl, are like, okay, Kanye's got it. And he also did a thing, he's all, the Jews run the banks, the Jews run all these things. So he's tapped into all these niche groups, and now he's become like their representative. But what I've noticed about these groups is that like, they're so scorned by maybe being lied to by the mainstream media or whatever it is, that their personality or identity has almost become the rejection thereof.
Yeah, well, that's always a threat that exists on the conservative side. The left-wingers always accuse the conservatives of being reactionary. And they're reactionary because they keep saying things like, you guys on the left, you're going too far. You got to slow down. You got to stop doing this. You're going too far. And that is reactionary in some sense, because they're always reacting to the excesses of the left. The conservative types tend not to want to change things. And, that can be their downfall too, because sometimes things have to change. Although intelligent conservatives sure know that. But it's hard for the conservatives to come up with a vision and to unite themselves because, well, first of all, they tend to stand for tradition, and it's not that easy to articulate traditional norms. And second, they do get reactionary, and that can turn into kind of a demented populism too, because the reactionary conservatives can go out and find the disaffected people on the right, and there's plenty of them now, and then capitalize on their resentment. I mean, Trump was pretty good at that in many ways, and continues to be so. And that's. I haven't been targeted particularly by the right, although I have to some degree years ago. When I first rose to whatever degree of notoriety I have now, a lot of the disaffected types on the right were also hoping that I'd be their guy. And same thing happened to Dan Crenshaw, the congressman, because he kind of he's got that evil right-wing supervillain appearance, if you in some sense. And they were kind of hoping he'd be their man, and he wasn't. And he actually gets targeted more by the conspiratorial right than he gets harassed by the left, which is quite the accomplishment on Crenshaw's part.
While today's cups of coffee often come with hints of soy and social justice, our new coffee sponsor delivers an entirely different experience. It's bold, strong, delicious, and overall as good as the causes it supports. I'm speaking, of course, about Black Rifle Coffee. Many of you know about Black Rifle already. It's a veteran-founded and operated coffee company who have made it their mission to hire 10,000 veterans, and they're well on their way. By purchasing for Black Rifle Coffee Company, you're directly supporting the military service community. But what about the coffee itself? Well, it's bold, strong, and really good. Go to blackriflecoffee.com and use promo code Jordan for 10% off your first order, or when you sign up for a new Coffee Club subscription. The subscription gives you free shipping on all Coffee Club orders, early access to club deals and promotions, and special discounts from their partner brands. That's blackriflecoffee.com with promo code Jordan for 10% off your first order, or when you sign up to become a Coffee Club member. Black Rifle Coffee, supporting veterans and America's coffee.
And he's a perfect example because it's almost like this group of people who have felt so rejected by everything. I'm talking about the extreme conservative. We need another term for it. Like, I don't like how liberal and conservative, it's too binary, because I don't even see like the extreme.
That's a woke thing
like,
to say.
Yeah, right? Now we're talking.
Yeah, good work, Andrew. Yeah, you see, you fell right into the clutches of that system of ideas.
I know.
It's too non-binary.
They get me.
Yeah.
But it's like, because I've seen the way that they went after Crenshaw when he disagreed, I think, about like gun rights or something like that. He was their champion as long as he said everything they agree with. And the second he diverted from their beliefs, he no longer was useful. And this happened to me. I didn't even know that this like cluster of people existed in this like organized way. But like I did a rant where I went after Kanye, and I thought it was kind of a pretty easy thing to do. Here's a billionaire that said some awful things. I'm going to roast him with jokes. This is what I do. I think we can make fun of billionaires. I think they're okay to make fun of. And there was this like onslaught of comments about people saying, you got it wrong. It was, it's fentanyl that killed George Floyd. You got it wrong. The Jews do run the banks. They do these things. And I'm like, what is this group of people? And why are they so organized and hateful? And why is Kanye their new guy? And I started DMing some people that were like trashing me. And I was just like, explain like what you're upset about to me. I don't understand. Like, we're just making fun of like a really rich guy that said some awful things. And the reaction that every single one of them said was so funny. They're like, look, Kanye's an idiot, but he's right about these things. And they're basically saying anybody who agrees with me and is famous, I'm going to ride for as long as they agree with me. And second they divert.
The problem with social media is that you have to hear from people like that. Let me tell you a story. I was talking to Andy No, the journalist who covers Antifa.
Yeah.
And I had been talking to some prominent Democrats about Antifa, and they said it doesn't exist. And I said, well, what do you mean it doesn't exist? It promoted riots in multiple American cities. There's people in black masks and uniforms that call themselves Antifa. How do you mean it doesn't exist? Say, well, there's hardly any of them. They're not really organized. They're not an official group. And they're they're such a tiny minority that they're negligible. And it didn't really appear to me that they were negligible, but these were respectable people and they weren't stupid. And I thought, okay, they probably have a reason for thinking this. So I asked Andy No about this, because he knows more about Antifa than anyone else in the world. And I said, how many Antifa cells do you think there are, cells, so to speak, in the United States? And he thought, well, maybe 40. And I said, well, how many full-time equivalent employees do each of these cells have, so to speak, right? How many people in each city are devoting their lives to being Antifa, whatever that means? And he figured 20. And so that's 800 out of 300 million. It's 1 in 400,000. And so that's none, right? In a city the size of Halifax, city many Americans probably don't know about, but it's a city of about 400,000 in Canada, you'd have one person. And in some ways that's zero people, right? It's just no one.
Right.
But the problem is that a very tiny number of people can cause a tremendous amount of problems, a tremendous amount of trouble. Maybe enough trouble to bring down a whole civilization. Maybe it only takes 1 in 100,000 to do that, especially if they're organized. And now with social media, well, they're always organized, because no matter how peculiar you are, you can find another 100 dimwits exactly like you on the net. And then you start to think that, well, you've got something there. And, in some ways that's a plus, because disaffected people can find a community. But man, it depends on who the disaffected people are and exactly what the community is up to. So, and then, you're in a situation where you're putting out content to hundreds of thousands or millions of people, and you get feedback, but it's demented and strange feedback, because it's not representative of the normal population. It's it might be that subset of people who had a really bad day for reasons you don't even understand and that are deciding to take it out on you behind a mask of anonymity. There's something very pathological about the democratization of public discourse on social media. It's really warped and demented.
Now, my question to you is, why do you think that those Democrat leaders didn't acknowledge that this was a problem? Do you think they truly didn't think it was a problem based on the data, or do you think that they were also acting in terms of self-preservation?
Well, I think they were much more concerned with 4chan and the conspiratorial right, which they regard as truly real.
But that's self-preservation, right?
You
can criticize the opposition and not lose votes.
It's also justification for their own beliefs.
Of course. But like, I actually admire what Crenshaw did, is he knew by taking that stand that he was going to reject some of his base. I admire that. That's a ballsy, brave move. Stand up for something you believe in, despite pissing off people who may follow you and support you. He's not acting in terms of self-preservation. He's doing what he genuinely thinks the right thing to do is. Now, in politics, this is middle management, right? You have to support your constituents if you want to stay in office, if you truly care about holding on to power. If you truly care about making change, you're going to piss off your constituents by rejecting Antifa, because the opposition is going to, or your maybe Democratic opposition is going to position you as someone who is not empathetic to the liberal plight.
Yeah, well, the easy way out of this, as far as I can tell, the only real way out of this conundrum is just to say what you think. Like, you don't have to say everything you think all the time, but you have to decide at some point whether you're going to pander to the short-term demands of your hypothetical constituents, or whether you're just going to say what you believe to be true. And the thing is that I watch politicians, and this is a particular terrible thing that's happening in the political arena right now, is they use opinion polls to sample the consequences of their actions. But most of that's just rubbish. And the reason I'm saying that, there's technical reasons for that, is that if you want to find out what people think, say, even one person, it's extremely difficult because, first of all, people don't know exactly what they think and they can't articulate it that well. And it's a mystery even to them. And so you have to spend a lot of time listening to find out what anybody thinks about anything, especially if you're not just going to go for their immediate cliches. And then if you're going to sample a whole population and try to get their opinion about some political issue, then you have to formulate the questions with unbelievable care. It really takes, to find out what people think about any given complex issue would probably take a team of reasonable researchers 2 or 3 months to formulate the questions accurately enough to get a reasonable response. And yet opinion pollsters claim that they can just tell you what people think by coming up with some questions. And so then the politicians judge the results of their actions by the opinion polls, which don't really represent people's views at all. And then we're led by this idiot whim of the mob. And the real leaders go out and listen to people.
Right.
And then aggregate their concerns and then act on principle. And that's essentially what Crenshaw did. And to tell the truth is to act on principle. And I think with regard to the medium to long term, rather than the short term immediate, popularity payoff, which is it's a very bad way to conduct your affairs. I don't think it's a good long term strategy. And imagine 100%. If you were a comedian and your rule was, I'll never make a joke that offends anyone.
Yeah. I'd be a very different comedian, I'll tell you that.
Yeah, I think pretty much every joke in your last special would have been cut.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so back to that. You said the streaming service that you were working with wanted to edit your show. And how in the hell did they decide what was the hierarchy of offense? Because I watched your special this morning and I thought every goddamn thing you said was offensive. So how do they decide what to cut and what to keep?
That's a great question. I'm sure that they have everybody has their list of what is right and wrong. And I think that list is so malleable. And I think for me, that's the most fun part of stand-up, is I like finding the divisive topic and then seeing if there's one kernel that we can all agree on. And sometimes that thing that we all agree on is the opposite of what everybody would like to present themselves as. So like I'm trying to think of even, I know I had a bit about abortion in the special, but I'm even thinking about like abortion right now, which is a very divisive topic, right? I don't know how you feel about it, but I've been like really thinking, I'm like, what is like the truth on how people feel about abortion? And I think I've gotten to it, which is, okay, everybody has a number of abortions where if you go past that, it's too many. So it's not really, even if you're liberal, it's not really your body, your choice. It's like your body, your choice up to like 3. And then all of a sudden people are like, what's going on over here? You know, 9 is a softball team. Like that's a lot, right? Like that. Usually people, even the most liberal person will be like, all right, we'll teach her how to put on a condom or something. Like what the is going on over here? And then the most conservative person, their number is 1. They're like, 1 is too many. But we all agree that there's a spectrum of when it's too much. And I think, like for me, that's where a joke begins, right? I go, ooh, okay, there's a whole group of people in like this liberal San Francisco audience where I may perform at, or a super liberal New York audience. What if I can get every person, even the women that are super pro-choice, to be like, yeah, 9 is a lot. 9, I think it might be the government's choice at 9. You know, like how can I get you to see the other side without being a politician about it, going, this is how you must live your life. How can I do it and we all laugh? You know, I think it was like Oscar Wilde said, if you want to tell someone the truth, make them laugh. If not, they'll kill you. And I don't think all comedy has to be truthful and all that kind of stuff. I think comedy speaks to feeling. It doesn't speak to what is right or wrong. It speaks to genuinely how you feel. And
it does tend to speak to truth in some real sense, because when you laugh, when an audience laughs, they laugh spontaneously, right? The laughter is truthful. Laugh.
But the laughter is truthful because it taps into a feeling. But just because you feel a thing doesn't mean that is right or wrong. And I think that's where a lot of times comedians get in trouble when they start going, I'm speaking truth to power. I'm telling you what's right or wrong. And it's like, buddy, don't put the cape on.
Yeah.
If you tell people you're just out here telling jokes, you're just having fun, now you're not going to be positioned with the responsibility to tell the truth every time. I want to tell fucked up jokes. I want to say messed up things. And in order for me to do that and have the freedom to create in that space, I can't be Superman. You know what I mean? I can't say that I'm the arbiter of truth. I'm going to get it right every single time. What I'm going to do every single time is make you laugh.
I think also that actually, what would you say? It subordinates comedy to something lower. You know, when you see this happening with entertainers very frequently, probably most often with actors, but sometimes with musicians, sometimes with other, let's call them entertainers, it's a bad term, creative artists, is they get possessed of the idea at some point that what they're doing isn't good enough. And that because it isn't good enough, they have to do something truly good. And that's usually something in the political arena. And what they don't understand is that there is almost nothing in the political arena that's anywhere near as good as what works in the creative arena. So you're immediately subordinating what's best to what's lowest. And so when you see a Hollywood actor go on a political rampage, you think, well, you were already doing a lot of good for the world with your creative actions. And now you're a second-rate politician, even though you were a first-rate actor or comedian or musician. And, you know, I've gone to a lot of artistic shows in recent years and had them polluted by political discussion. And you get pulled into the performance, and then halfway through, there's something politically correct, often, because that's generally the case now. And you think, oh my God, I got suckered here. You know, I was coming to hear someone great do something great. Now I have to listen to the same half-wit political opinion that I could have not paid for and listened to any undergraduate spout. It's like, well, thanks a lot for that. You know, you think Black Lives Matter. Well, you know, that doesn't make you special.
Yeah.
You know, anyone who's not an outright bloody Nazi thinks that. And so it's just not, it's just not elevating. And it's a very sad thing to see that creative artists are buying the idea, part of this rat's nest of ideas we were talking about earlier, that that politics is somehow morally superior, political opinions are somehow morally superior to creative endeavor. That's definitely the case on the comedy front.
Yeah, it's I wonder if it, yeah, I think it's hard. I think like with success and notoriety, well, it's twofold. It's like with extreme criticism, for example, you went through extreme criticism. It's hard, I would imagine, to stick to your guns when you know that you could easily back into the comfort of the people supporting you, right? It's the brave move is, despite the criticism, continue saying and feeling the things that you feel, for lack of a better way to describe it, but like to continue being consistent on how you feel and expressing that. It's very easily to get like this onslaught of criticism from the left and then just go, all right, the right likes me, I'm going to go right wing, all my opinions are conservative, etc. It's much harder to piss off the left one day, piss off the right the other day, because that's who you are as a real person. Nobody is 100% in that way and feeling that thought every single time, like what I try to, I guess, express in a lot of comedy. Like, I have an abortion bit in the special. To this day, nobody knows which side I am on the abortion issue, right? And both sides think that joke represents them. That's designed on purpose to do that. Like, if you even look at the comments, both of them are recognizing like the faults in their side and also the support of their side. And to me, it was really cool to put out a piece like that wasn't going, you're an idiot for not believing exactly what I believe, especially a divisive topic like that. I just think it's, I don't know, like, did you have that moment where you were getting this onslaught of criticism and people were calling you the next fucking Nazi this, and then you're the muse for like movie villains? Was there ever a moment where you were like, this, I don't need to stay true to myself. Let me back into the comfort of the people who love me?
Postmodernism is tearing our world apart. The one thing that may be able to unite us is a mass return to our Judeo-Christian roots. At the individual level, that means developing our prayer life. There's a ton of literature out there on the benefits of secular New Age mindfulness meditation, but what isn't talked about nearly enough is the power of a consistent prayer life. That's where Hallow comes into play. Hallow is the #1 Christian prayer app in the US and the #1 Catholic app in the world. Hallow features over 5,000 prayers and meditations, including daily prayers to help you build a habit of prayer and gratitude, Bible reflections with Jeff Cavins and Father Mike Schmitz to help you grow in knowledge and understanding, meditations to help you prepare for sleep and rest each day, reflections with Bishop Barron, and much more. Use Hallow as a foundational tool to grow in gratitude and character each and every day. Try it free for 3 months by going to hallow.com/Jordan. That's hallow.com/Jordan. Ground yourself in fundamental truths with Hallow today.
Yeah, well, it's hard to say, because a lot of that's pretty subtle. If all the attacks or almost all the attacks are coming from one side and almost all the support is coming from the other side, it also puts you in a position of having to wonder just exactly who your friends are. And one of the things I have found is that for me, for whatever reason, and I don't think that this is unique to me, it's a lot harder for me to talk to people on the left. And the reason for that, and it didn't used to be like that, not 10 years ago or 15 years ago. In fact, if you'd talked to me 15 years ago, I probably would have thought that I was at least moderately on the left. And so, but in any case, I always feel like I have to walk on eggshells. I feel like I have to watch what I'm saying. And I don't really like talking to people around whom I have to watch what I'm saying. I actually like to talk to people and I can just say what I have to say, especially if it happens to be funny, which now and then is the case. And so, and then it is difficult not to identify with people who support you, especially if that goes on for years. And so who knows how that changes you? I definitely have become more conservative in my thinking. And I would say, I think there are intellectual reasons for that primarily, though. Because one of the things I've understood more deeply recently, more explicitly, I've been putting this together, is that the definition of sanity that's generally implicitly held among the psychological community is probably too individualistic. And what I mean by that is that I don't think that sanity is something that you have in your head. It's not part of your psyche. It's not part of you exactly. It's more like harmonious interaction with the hierarchy of social arrangements that you have with other people. So, well, imagine this, for example. A neighbor I knew on my street said to me once, "You're never any happier than your most unhappy child." Right, so that's a good one. But so you imagine, well, you're a pretty sane person and you're married and your marriage is terrible. It's like, well, then you're not that sane, are you? And if you have a terrible marriage and you're not getting along with your kids, then you're also not very sane. And if you're in a terrible marriage and you don't get along with your kids and you're fighting with your siblings and your parents, then you're even less sane. And so you imagine that sanity, you're sane if you have a relationship that's working. If you have a relationship with your family that's working, if that family is nested inside a community that isn't too fractious, there's something musical about it. It's like every note has its place. And so
I think,
you see what I mean? And it's also...
I see what... I see what you mean, but if I can give some pushback, I would say that like the person that has the miserable marriage and unhappy kids, but is still seemingly happy, that person is insane to me. The person that has unhappy kids in an unhappy marriage and is unhappy is sane.
Yes, that's exactly that's exactly the point I'm making is that, because the thing is that if you aren't reflecting the structure of the social communities around you, then you're off calibration. Yes. Well, here, I was talking to a woman named Jean Twenge yesterday, and she's a research psychologist. We were talking about self-esteem. And one of the self-esteem movement in the school system in California was absolutely dreadfully devastating and appalling. It basically posited that you could teach kids how to be narcissistic to overcome their negative emotion and neuroticism. And that's so preposterously appalling that you couldn't invent something stupider. So we were talking about self-esteem, whatever the hell that means, because it's a very badly defined term. But here's one way of determining whether you have the appropriate amount of self-esteem. You might say, well, everyone should feel good about themselves. It's like, well, if you're a miserable, ratty, lying, deceptive, narcissistic prick, then probably you shouldn't feel that good about yourself. And how do you know that? Because you should feel about as good about yourself as people on average do around you about you, right? Yes. So and we even know this technically because you have a little counter, so to speak, in your psyche that ranks you in terms of your social standing. And the higher you're ranked, the less negative emotion you feel and the more positive emotion you feel. And that's because your brain is indicating to you that you're well situated in a social community and you're secure with opportunity. And so your self-esteem that's exactly how it works. It's a very... So what happens to people who get depressed, technically depressed, is that that counter goes astray and they start thinking less of themselves than their situation would indicate. And so then everything around them falls apart. They feel that their past was a catastrophe. They feel that their present is hopeless and that the future isn't going anywhere. But it's because this really, really low-level counter that utilizes serotonin has gone astray. And sometimes antidepressants can help deal with that. Now, that isn't someone who has a terrible life. That's someone who has a good life, but something's gone wrong with them psychophysiologically often, so the counter is out of whack. In any case, you should have about as much self-esteem as other people are willing to grant you. And that's kind of a conservative idea as well, in some real sense.
Enough self-esteem as others are willing to grant you.
It's like, well, imagine, if everybody in the company assumes that you're an average performer, you should probably assume that you're an average performer. You shouldn't be running around feeling good about yourself in excess of that, because your attitude towards yourself should be a reflection of your actual situation in the social environment.
So my pushback on that would be, if your self-esteem is defined by how the people around you treat you, how can you break out when you're in especially when you're in an industry of narcissists that are really only concerned with how they're doing, what they want. How do you separate yourself?
That's a great question, man. And that's the trick that
Well,
presents
the
itself to
answer
everyone
maybe-
creative.
But the answer maybe is, and this is, I don't know if we support this, but this might be the truth. There is a reason why narcissists tend to break out, because their self-esteem is not limited by the views of others.
That is true. That is exactly true. Well, in fact, in that regard, so you put your finger on something that's cardinally important, because it is generally the case that your view of yourself should reflect the views of those around you. But the problem with that is now and then the social situation gets so pathological that that's no longer reliable. Now, when that happens, you're really in trouble. That's the first thing we should point out, because if society has got so demented that its feedback can no longer be trusted, then everything's going to hell in a handbasket pretty quickly. But that is when you get the necessity for people to call on whatever it is within them that makes them true moral agents to, let's say what they believe to be true with great caution. But I would say even in those circumstances, like I've been fortunate when I've been doing that, to the degree I've been able to do that, because I have friends around me who are giving me accurate feedback, I would say, and careful feedback, despite the mob pressure. I don't know if anybody could really do that alone. You know what I mean? Maybe you could.
Yeah, 100%. And 100%. I just know, and I'm sure you felt this as well, is that like, at least when I'm running my business and I have my friends and the guys that I work with and build with, I personally feel most creative when I have support, right? So when there is a momentum, when the ball is moving, when there's an avalanche, that's when these explosions of creativity happen to me in a conversation. When I'm talking to someone or other people who value what I have to say, all of a sudden I have tons to say. I'm excited to share. When I'm talking to someone who thinks that I'm an idiot, I'm questioning the things that I have to say. So in my mind, I'm trying to foster an environment where everybody here feels the confidence to access their genius, right? Now, if their genius in one zone is a 6, that's fine. If their genius in another zone is a 10, that's fine. But let me get the best version of you. Now, that's not saying we're buttering people up.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we're not treating it like, I don't know, I think like creativity is not a football field, right? Where it's like you can only run as fast as you can run. I can yell at a player, he's still gonna run a 40 in 5 seconds. I can say he sucks, he's gonna run a 40 in 5 seconds. I can say he's great, he's gonna run a 40 in 5 seconds. But with somebody who's coming up with like a creative idea, a funny idea, the more I build his confidence up, the more willing he is to go into those deep, weird concepts that might produce something incredibly creative.
Yeah. Well, you do a lot of that by listening and attending, right? And
Yes.
and yeah, because people will manifest themselves more fully in precise proportion to the degree that they're being attended to and listened to. I was thinking too about the calibration issue. You know, one of the values of a real education is that you start to spread the community that you identify with over vast spans of time. So, you know, in the humanities in particular, at least in principle, there was a golden thread of conversation that's been going on at least from the time of Socrates between great minds moving forward that have been adjudicated as great by the consensus of the entire educated community, let's say. And now that's all, of course, parodied as patriarchal oppression, but we'll leave that aside for the moment. And then maybe when you're called upon to speak carefully and truthfully, despite mob pressure and despite your otherwise laudable willingness to abide by the judgment of the group starts to expand across time. And so the pathologies of the moment can be ignored in favor of the, what would you call it, the wisdom of the group stretching across thousands and thousands of years. And you see, that's also, in some sense, a conservative idea in the deepest sense, because the idea would be that there is a fundamental spiritual tradition that manifests itself philosophically and theologically that has to be attended to despite the vagaries of the moment. And so, and that seems to be right. You know, I mean, I think what you do if you go to university and you get a real education you find a peer group, the peer group of creative and truthful thinkers, and their thought in some sense exists outside of time, right? It's eternally valuable. And it doesn't matter what the situation is. And then you can judge your actions in the moment against those standards.
Yeah, but you're still picking the people whose standards most resemble yours.
Well, not necessarily. Not if you're really getting educated, because then you get exposed to a lot of people who didn't necessarily think the way you thought.
Well, this is why it's so important. It's like, and this is why the internet is amazing, but also dangerous. It's just like university in this way. Okay, before the internet, there was college. And that's how I described it. In high school, you talk to some people that had rough experiences in high school, especially people who are younger than me. And I said, hey, just wait till you go to college. You're going to be dealing with way more people and you'll be able to be yourself because there's some other people that actually feel just like you. Right? And you're going to really like this college experience because you're going to find a friend group that just didn't exist in your small 100 kid per grade high school. Right? The internet is that on steroids, right? Now that little 4-person group that really likes gaming and wearing masks and doing all this other shit is 4 million globally. You get to feel part of a big group and you have all these people that like what you have to say. But what I think that the internet can often do, and it's something that like I try my hardest to not let it do, is it dulls our sword. What we don't have to communicate outside of the echo chamber. Right? We know if we want, we can say the things we believe to the people who also believe them. And now there's no more nuance. One of the great things about getting on stage and doing a stand-up comedy show when people don't know I'm going to be there, right? I've been very fortunate to go and sell out in the biggest theaters in the country, right? This has been awesome. But one of the really cool things about going up to a show where people don't know I'm going to be there is there are people who may disagree with me, hate me, not know me, and also love me all in the same room. And it keeps my tongue sharp. I have to communicate to those people ideas that they might disagree with in a way that's funny enough for them to listen and then project laughter. I fear, and I sometimes fear that like you've experienced so much fucking undeserved hate from the left that it's positioned you as with some resentment, which is reasonable. I don't know how you're even still having like the common debate and discourse. Like if most people in your situation, they would just say, F them, screw them, whatever. But your information is more important to the people who don't agree with you than the ones who already agree. You know what I'm saying? Like explaining the value of, let's say, God. I'm not someone who was raised with religion, but I believe in the power of it. And so explaining the power of God to someone who is not religious is more important than to the believer. Because if that person can get something from it, it's so powerful. But if you've only ever explained it to your congregation, you're not going to be able to communicate it to me or another person or a person who is maybe there's even an atheist. There's no way they're going to be able to digest it.
Yeah, well, that was part of the potential danger of joining forces with the Daily Wire, because they're obviously a conservative enterprise. And my family and I thought long and hard about that. I mean, first of all, I like working with the Daily Wire. They've been extremely good to work with. They've left me alone. Not only have they left me alone to do whatever it is that I want to do, they've helped me do things I wanted to do that I wouldn't have been able to do otherwise. And I also felt that it was appropriate and wise to find some allies on the social media front because, I got banned off Twitter. And, YouTube hasn't harassed me much, although they've demonetized my daughter several times for reasons that are completely opaque. And God only knows, what might happen on the YouTube front. I know they've demonetized Yeonmi Park many times, the North Korean dissident. And that's because Yeonmi Park objects to North Korea, and you'd think you'd be able to get away with that, given that it's, after all, North Korea, which is like the worst dictatorship anyone's ever managed to produce, which is really saying something, right? Because there's been some pretty bad dictatorships. And so, and obviously the Daily Wire is a conservative enterprise, and I was worried that that would compromise my ability to communicate with the very people that you were just discussing, especially about the things that I want to talk about. But, also, I would say, I don't exactly know what to make of this. You also find your friends where they're willing to have you. And I get pilloried quite often for not talking to enough people on the left. And a huge part of the reason for that is that most of the time they won't talk to me. I spent years trying to find Democrats who would speak to me, actual politicians who would speak to me on my YouTube channel. And although I have a couple identified now and potentially lined up, for years, the answer to that request was, there's no way we're going on your channel. And so, how the hell can you talk to people if they just say no?
Why should they? Why should they go on their channel? You're going to lobotomize them. Like, I don't think the answer is speaking to politicians. Like, I remember first engaging like with your content. And what I think is so powerful about you is that you're such a thoughtful thinker that you can really almost, I don't want to use the word weaponize, but like you can weaponize arguments for the average person that has feelings they can't articulate.
Yeah.
And I think what's so powerful about that is that you're giving a voice to someone that doesn't feel confident enough to express themselves, right? And but what's really great about it is that it's articulated in a way in which the other side understands and accepts. And I think it's one of the reasons I was probably drawn to you is because I like doing this with comedy, regardless on which side I'm fighting for. I would never take a political side because that's my ability to dance.
Yeah.
I can't dance once I say I'm on one. I don't want you to know where the joke is going. But what I loved is you deliver this information and it was so hard to refute it. And I don't care whether you're on the Daily Wire or whether you're on CNN Plus or whatever that shit is. It doesn't matter to me because as long as your thoughts stay true to you, then that will be communicated. Maybe less people on the left will digest them because you're on the Daily Wire and that's their fucking bias, which is stupid. But I do want your ideas to get to them, and I want them to get to them in a way where it's not coming with resentment, because nobody listens once they're told they're an idiot first. You know what I mean? Like, if you're going to listen, you fucking idiot, here's why you're a fucking idiot. I already shut down. You know what I'm saying? Like, because you said you want to fight me. You didn't say you want to teach me something. And I wonder if when you were teaching in the university level, you were almost, it was like the comedy club with the strangers. You don't know who these kids are, where they're from.
Well, it was also it was never political. None of the things I did at the university until I objected to some Canadian legislation were ever political.
Yeah.
And, I didn't really expect
politics
things to turn
ruins
out
everything.
the way they
I
did.
wish we could just talk about it culturally. Like, I don't know, politics creates this divide, and there are these people that it's just like we were talking about before, where they're just trying to preserve themselves. They just want to keep their job. They want to win their next reelection, and they're using you in some gotcha strategy. And I hated seeing it happen. But there's certain realms that once you enter, you deal with the onslaught. There's like institutions, like with banking, people are going to take you out. Politics, people are going to take you out. And there's probably like another one as well. But for me, it's like, what are these cultural conversations? Like, it's important, the messaging that you get across. And I know it. And you do something, and I'm not trying to compliment myself here. I'm just complimenting you. But like, for me, when you express a viewpoint or a feeling, and my 75-year-old mother likes it, and a 19-year-old kid likes it, you're speaking to core, primal human instinct. Okay? That is what jokes do. If I see, when I see generations of people at one of my shows, when I see a father and his son both laughing together, like, one, I get emotional almost because I'm like, oh, I love those moments with my dad.
Yeah.
But two, I'm like, I'm hitting core. I'm hitting who you are. I'm not tapping into this like community you're supposed to be a part of. I'm tapping into something primal.
Yeah, well, so, you talked about people's ability to find community online and the analogy between that and the colleges. I think the difference is that when you go to college and you find people who have your intellectual and creative interests, let's say, you also do that under the tutelage of older people. So there's an apprenticeship element, and you do it while you're being introduced to the great thinkers of the past. And so there's again, that's a conservative idea in some sense. It's like you get this new freedom and you get to expose yourself, so to speak, to new people. But you do that within the confines of an intellectual tradition. And so that stops it from going seriously sideways, let's say, into the realm of ideology or propaganda or conspiratorial thinking, which are pathologies that you might associate with that emergent group identity. And a lot of that's lacking online, obviously.
Agreed. Yeah. I hate how, I'll be honest, like, I hate how the right has been bastardized. I hate how the left has been turned into like a bunch of like pussy little cucks. Like, I think that there's these extreme versions, right? Like, the extreme right is not like a Romney conservative. You know what I mean? Like, the extreme left is not like, Clinton is, embroiled in controversy, obviously. But like when my parents were growing up and they were like Clinton Democrats, or even Obama, if you want to say it, like these things are so close, yet the parties are defined by their extremes. It's almost like soccer clubs. When you look at like these soccer teams, they're like defined by their hooligans a lot of times. It's like the hooligans are not even 5% of the people that even go to the games, right? So what I would love is the discourse to come back here.
Yeah, well,
and
part of that, I really think, I was talking again to this Gene Twangy the other day about what's happening online to facilitate that. And this tiny percentage of bad actors goes without punishment online. And that's a huge problem. If you're a real troublemaking prick in person, someone's going to give you a swat. And that's going to keep you down, and sometimes that doesn't happen appropriately and sometimes it does. But generally speaking, people watch their tongues pretty carefully when they're talking face to face with actual others. And the narcissists and the Machiavellians and the psychopaths keep themselves pretty well in check because of that pressure. But online, none of those sanctions exist. Plus, the social media companies capitalize on the agitation they produce. And they literally capitalize on it because their algorithms drive people's attention towards the polarizing influences. And so we're in a situation now where that 3%, because it's probably no more than that, holds disproportionate influence over political discourse online. And I have this suspicion that that's really tearing us apart. Because it's obliviating the middle, right? The reasonable middle.
Yeah.
And it's also the case, I think, that the people in the reasonable middle, because they're reasonable and because they're just going about their lives, aren't that good at articulating the values of the middle, right?
Yes.
Because I always think about this in relationship to marriage. It's like, some radical can come up to you and poke you and say, justify marriage. And the typical person is just going to be set back on their heels. It's like, well, I don't know how to do that. We agreed 50,000 years ago that marriage was a good thing. I can't come up with a philosophical justification for it. It's like, why do you love your children?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. I just... well, it's the ideas that bind us, that are deep, they're not generally articulated. And so when they're challenged, those who hold them have no idea what to say. And here's another example. I like to use this on people who are radically left. It's like, why is slavery wrong? Oh, they think, well, God, it's obvious that slavery's wrong. Slavery's just wrong. It's like, okay, fair enough. Why?
Yeah.
Well, as far as I can tell, it has to do with the fundamental sanctity of the individual. It's basically a religious claim.
Yeah, you're removing their freedom.
Yeah, and their freedom is an appropriate part of them because they're a part of divine providence. It's something like that. That's the axiomatic claim. Well, if you dispense with the entire religious underlay, which is certainly what you do if you're on the radical left, it's like, well, then why not just use power? If I can make you do what I want you to do, why the hell not do it?
This is how jokes work.
It's like, but why is it wrong?
But this is how jokes work. Isn't this beautiful? It's like you find a way to get a person who is an atheist, doesn't believe in religion, thinks religion is the worst thing in the world, to agree that religion has immense value by getting them to agree that a thing they hate, slavery, is wrong. And then you attach why slavery is wrong to the thing that they also think is wrong. And now they have to choose one or the other. And that's not a hard choice, religion or slavery. Great.
Why did you just compare that to a joke? I think you're right, but why did that connection occur for you?
Because you're making people choose. Well, for me, that's how I would enter anything. I would go, okay, there's a person who is not religious. Or we can even use let's person who's not religious. I would like to convince that person that religion is valuable, right? So, and I have bits that I've done about this, right? So what do they hold true? What are their other values? Maybe they're very liberal. Maybe they don't believe in, I don't think you have to be liberal to not believe in slavery. We should all not believe in slavery. But here's another thing that they would hold true. They disagree with slavery. Okay, now if I believe that the reason why man has the right to their I guess, independence and their freedom is because I'm a God-made individual and God would never make somebody chained, then that person has to accept that God is the reason why slavery is wrong, and therefore has to agree.
So there is something definitely there, because a punchline. So there's a whole line of psychological.
We need a punchline still. Yeah, we need a punchline still, but that's a premise.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. The punchline is what drives it home. And one of the things that I have found, I think that what I do on stage is most analogous to what stand-up comedians do. And the reason for that is that when I do a lecture, for example, or try to answer a question, there's usually an investigation, but it has to build up to a punchline. There has to be a culminating moment where it's driven home, and that's a moment of insight. And what it does is it takes a bunch of information that's sort of been scattered around and brings it together. And everybody goes, aha! And that's very much like the climax of a joke. And it's part of insight. And so there's a psychological literature on insight, and insight seems to develop when a number of things that weren't linked together are suddenly linked together. And you go, aha, that's how all that fits together. And comedians are doing that all the time, because
we're explaining the world, and sometimes we're explaining the world in ways that don't really make sense, but they're funny connections. I had one of the earlier jokes in my career that worked was, we were talking a lot about like the oppression of women. And I'm like, okay, maybe it'd be funny if I could find a justification for the oppression of women. So I said, the oppression of women is horrible. Countries that treat women horrible, that's just awful, but they have the best food. So my nobody's ever said, let's go out for a Canadian tonight. Right? So to me, that's like the more equal a country, the worse the food is. And then the more oppressive the country, the better. Like, I think one of the lines was, the more countries like stay in the kitchen, the better the food comes out of the kitchen. Now these are absurd concepts, but a really funny connectivity, right? I'm justifying something awful, but now all of a sudden everybody in the room is kind of agreeing like, holy shit. Like, I'm not a fan of Swedish food. I'm not a fan of, I really love hummus. You know what I'm saying?
Norwegians eat fermented shark. Jesus, that's an argument against the equality of women right there. Fermented shark, man, that's just not a good idea. There's cans of that stuff. I think it's called surströmming. You can't fly on airplanes with cans of that because they explode. So that is not a food you should eat.
So to me, now I don't have the responsibility you have, which is to be truthful and right. So I can dabble in the wrong, and the wrong is so funny. But for me, like, I don't know, I just love this. I love the wrong. The wrong is great, and it allows us to explore ideas. Like, I got a boxing coach, right? And not for anything else other than exercise. I just love to do the sport, right? But and he's from Egypt, and he was speaking to me in Egyptian Arabic, and I thought that like curse words are a great way of organizing a society's hierarchy in values, like the different curse words that they use, right? And he was telling me, he'll call me different curse words. He called me mitnaka, right? Which means prostitute. Sorry. Mitnaka means slut, actually, for lack of a better word. And then he goes, sharmuta, he calls me, which means prostitute. He goes, now listen, outside of here, don't say mitnaka to anybody. That is a horrible word. Okay, you cannot say that. Do not, he's basically, don't call anybody a slut. He goes, you can call people sharmuta, that's not that bad. I go, wait. You're saying slut is worse than prostitute? And he goes, well, sometimes you have to for money. That makes sense. But just for pleasure, what is wrong with you? Go your boyfriend or something. And I thought it was like such a beautiful look into culture. You know what I'm saying? Like there are dire circumstances that made it more reasonable to have sex for money because you needed money to survive, maybe you needed to help your family. And that was forgiven culturally. In this, it was like understood. It was like, you don't want to do that, but at least you're doing it to support your family.
Yeah, well, the curse words always touch on taboos, right? And so taboos would be the worst thing in a society. In Quebec, all the curse words are church related.
Tabernacle.
Yeah, exactly. How do you know that? Why do you know that?
It's my job to know these things.
So let me ask you again about your special. So It was going to be edited. Did you know how heavily it was going to be edited?
Yeah, they told me certain jokes that they didn't like. And again, I don't necessarily have resentment for companies that are trying to protect themselves. You have that right as a company. I disagree because I don't think it is the protection that you want. I think the ultimate protection is putting out great content that people love.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. That's how you develop the moat. But I think it's very easy to just go like, you guys want to censor, blah, blah, blah. It's like, yeah, I get it. You have a family, you have kids in private school. You don't want that maybe responsibility of putting out the thing that got your company in trouble, yada, yada, yada. So I don't have personal resentment. It was frustrating. So basically, long story short, what I did is I bought the special back. And they could have said no to this, but I was able to buy the special back, which I'm very grateful for. And I put it up on my own, I put it up on Moment. Moment is this platform where you can, stream content. So basically pay for people to buy a ticket to watch the show and then own it in perpetuity. So I first did a window there, kind of like a movie, right? Like you go see Batman in the movie theater. That's how I was thinking about it. You go see Batman in the movie theater. It's there in the movie theater for a couple months. And then a few months after that, it's on cable. So I was like, let me try this for comedy. I put it up here and, fingers crossed. And it does unbelievably well. And I made way more than I would ever make on the special itself. It was the most money I've ever made in my life, to be honest with you.
And that was Moment.
It was on with Moment, yeah. So like Moment, Moment World is now what it is, but it was Moment House when I did it. But Moment, it's just a great company. They've been doing these live stream events. They do it for bands. They do it for comedians. And I'm hoping that this is another pathway for comics to put their content out and have a window where they can monetize it. I mean, the beautiful thing about putting your stuff out on YouTube is it goes to the world, but you're not able to monetize it in the same way. And in order to create a special like the one that we created, I mean, it costs $400,000 to shoot the special.
Right.
You have to be able to generate money to do something that can compete with a Netflix, compete with any of these other, an HBO, any of these platforms. I want to be able to create that content and put it out there. So we put it behind this window and people came out, they supported it. It was amazing. And then a few months later, I put it out on YouTube.
Yeah.
And that, I think we're at 8 million views in a month or something like that. So now I get all the new people, all the people who weren't familiar with me, all the people that didn't know who I existed, and their friends can share it. But I was also able to give it to the fans who really have rode for me from the beginning and give them this experience. Also, the YouTube version, I put some ads in.
I watched it. I watched it this morning. Well, what did you charge for the special on Moment?
$15.
And how long did you have it up there before you switched it to YouTube?
I did two-week windows. So I just did 2 weeks, and then so many people are asking for it that I put it back up for another 2 weeks a week later.
And why did you decide on those time periods?
I wanted to create urgency. I think one of the issues with just having, like it up is I'll get to it. I think that's one of the problems with content in general. Like, I think there's this idea with it streaming. I'll get to it. I'll get to it. And then you never get to it. And there's just so much that you have to get to. And I think that if you create urgency, like a boxing match is we have to watch this tonight. An MMA fight, we have to watch this. A sporting event, we have to. So knowing that there's this 2-week window where you could watch it with no ads and this was the way it was going to be, also there was no telling when I put it on YouTube if they weren't going to take it down. So like this was the only time that you were 100% sure that you could watch it in its entirety. And it also created this time where like everybody, well, not everybody, but a lot of people watched it at the same time.
Right.
So we had a live viewing. And it created this communal feeling, which we want. Like, I love watching House of Dragons, the Game of Thrones reboot. I love watching it on Sunday with everybody else and then going on Twitter and seeing how people are reacting to it and taking part in this massive group experiment and hearing their live real-time reactions. To me, this is awesome. So I wanted to create that for a comedy special. And it was awesome. We were able to do it, man.
Yeah. Well, I'll have to look into Moment. That sounds extremely interesting. And then I'll
connect you with them.
Okay, good.
You doing one of your lectures, for example, on Moment, like creating this moment, having this moment for all these people to all check in at the exact same time. And they've got some other really cool features too. Like you can sell merch while you're watching it. Like there are all these different things that are like easy to access. People can comment real time on it, which is also cool. But like having this place where all these people who want to experience this thing with you, be it live or pre-recorded, but before it goes out to the world, and people want to support. That's another thing I learned. Like I've given out so many hours of comedy. There's so many people that hit me up and they're like, listen, like you've made me laugh through really dark times for years. Like there are people when I put it up on YouTube started donating money. I didn't even know that was a thing that you could do, but they felt guilty that they didn't buy it in the first window.
People don't really want something valuable for nothing. They want to contribute their part, generally speaking. That's why giving away things for free in some real sense is a bad pricing decision. And so, because it does deprive people of the opportunity to reciprocate, and they want to be able to reciprocate.
Yeah.
So now you're having, I think, more success on the movie front. That's correct?
Yeah, I've been able to do some small roles in some films, and I guess those are all going to come out. I don't even know when they're going to come out, but I want to make a film. So, yeah, to be honest, I guess, I don't know. Here's I want to make a film. I'm really excited, but I'm really getting into story now and the power of story. And I don't know, I have this theory that like, I think we have a biological reaction to stories in the same way that we have to music. Like I notice when I'm hanging out with my friends that I've known for decades, we will retell the same stories that we were all a part of. And every single time our eyes light up and we get goosebumps and we laugh and we get excited and the stories morph and change and we get to like relive them in the same way when a song comes on that was a song you absolutely loved or you were going through something, you get to feel all those like emotions again, like you tap towards them. And like even when somebody tells a story in a group, it's different than when someone has like a hot take or a premise. It's like, hey, this thing happened. Everybody shuts up. And all of a sudden we're like around the campfire for some reason.
Yeah.
So I'm curious your take on what that is about us and story. Is it like our earliest version of digesting information?
Well, I think I'm writing a new book called We Who Wrestle with God, and that's really what it's about. It looks to me like, I think it's incontrovertible in some sense that we see the world through a story. And so if you're out with your friends and you're telling a shared story, then you're literally building the shared set of assumptions that constitutes the friendships. And so think about the leftist take on the world. So the leftist take is something like the fundamental story is one of power, and the relationships between people are structured as a consequence of power. That's true for marriages, it's true for history, it's true for the Western canon, it's true for economic interactions. It's all about power. Well, that's a story. And it's not a very good story, by the way, and it's also not a story that unites or reflects reality in an accurate manner, because social relationships are only predicated on power when they become corrupt. So, well, if you have to force someone to be your friend, that's just not working very well. If you have to force your wife to pay attention to you, then the bloody situation is degenerated. If you have to force your children to listen all the time, then you're not mutually acting out a very good story. And so the question is, what's the story that's the antithesis of power? And I think the antithesis of power is play. If you're ensconced in a good story, then what you're doing is playing. This is one of the reasons I really like watching comedians, because they're playing all the time. And I think that play, the spirit of play, is actually the antithesis of the spirit of power.
Let me tell you something that will prove your theory. And I have to give credit to my podcast co-host and just creative partner in so many things, but Mark Gagnon. But I took him to this thing called Burning Man this past year. And his reflection on Burning Man was, he goes, it's just adult play. I go, what do you mean? He goes, think about it. The whole thing is adult play. Now, to tap into the power thing, Burning Man is what happens when you remove power. There's no currency, you cannot buy anything, and there's no restriction in terms of your ability to enter once you're there. Every party is welcome to everybody. Every place is welcome to everybody. You can't even buy things, you just give. So you remove traditional power structure and hierarchy. What is left for humans? Play. Dress how you want to dress, dance how you want to dance, party how you want to party, be silly, prank one another. But play is the absence of power. Wow, that's kind of cool.
Well, look at what happened. Yeah. I used to go work out with a couple of my friends in Boston, and we used to try to make each other laugh when we were bench pressing, because as soon as you laugh, you lose all your muscular control. And so it's obvious that play and humor are antithetical to power, because as soon as you laugh, you're powerless. I think I talked to Theo Vaughn about this, the comedian. His mother had a very strange condition. If he made her laugh, she would actually fall asleep. Yeah, she'd lose so much muscular control that she would fall asleep. He said he used to try making her laugh when she was driving. Yeah, which seems like, not the wisest thing to do, but he apparently wasn't the wisest child, at least by his own admission.
Well, he was curious. He was playing.
Yeah. So this is a very lovely thing to know, I think, is that, and then the right story to tell is one that enables people to play along.
But that's the beautiful thing. It's like when I hang out with my friends, like when we have those moments together, that is what we're engaging in. We're engaging with this ball busting, we're engaging with this play, and we're engaging with these storytelling, that these stories always share something about who one of us is or who we all are. Blah, 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 loves big girls. Remember when we were doing this and he had that girl? Man, she wasn't that big, blah, blah, blah. And now it's like, I'm not going to make a parallel to the Bible, but like, there's a reason why the Bible didn't just say, just do these things. There's a reason why they put them in story, right? Because it's far more impactful to listen to this story. And I wonder if, like, through osmosis, the behavior in the stories kind of get locked into our long-term memory, where if you just tell someone a rule, it's short-term and then might be fleeting.
Well, the thing about having the rule embodied in the story is you see how it's acted out. So, and then that's much more convincing to watch how something's acted out, partly because then you also know how to act it out, right? If it's just a rule, you have to translate the rule into action. But if it's a story, then the actions are laid out for you. And they say that every story has a moral, and in some sense, that would be the rule of the story. But it's not necessarily always that easy to extract out the rule, but you can still understand the story.
Yeah. I want to do a deep dive. And like, I think one of the issues with Hollywood right now, to be honest, and like why some of these films just don't make sense, or so many of them don't, is because the creator of the idea is so far removed from the executor of the project.
Yeah.
So like, hey, here's a great idea for a movie, blah, blah, blah. And then someone goes, I'm going to buy that from you. That's great. Thank you so much. And then we're going to go make it. And they're making it with all these people that are also kind of detached from the project. If you look at the writer-directors, their movies hit at a much higher rate. Yeah. And it's not only because maybe they're more talented, but it's because they're invested in the project all the way through. It means something if that project fails because their identity is wrapped into it. a random person that gets thrown on a project, a random writer that does punch up that's not even credited.
They also benefit from the success disproportionately. So, you were talking about these censorship proclivities. So one of the things I observed in the corporate world when I was attempting to sell to middle managers was that if they bought something from me and it failed, they would get blamed. That would happen. But if they bought something from me and it was very successful for the company, they wouldn't get credited.
Oh, they wouldn't?
No, because of this. So I'll give you an example. We were selling these tests, psychological tests, and to a group of people who were doing the hiring. And they said, well, they got budgeted on the cost side. So every cent they spend on hiring would be credited to them, right, as an expense. But if they hired much better people and the company did well, that wouldn't be credited to them as a accomplishment, because the value would go to someone else. It wouldn't be directly attributed to them. And so what happened to them was that there was an outside risk to each of them for acting in an entrepreneurial manner, and very little upside if it was successful. And you can imagine in a Hollywood production, for example, that isn't spearheaded by a writer-director, if it's successful, he's going to be wildly successful. Now, he has to shoulder the blame too. But if it's distributed among a bunch of people, then they're going to get blamed if something goes wrong. But if it goes real well, they're not going to get credited.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's how you have a shitty project. Maybe you get lucky and it ends up working out. But yeah, I think that I like shouldering that blame. I'll take the risk on myself with these projects like that I want to do. Like, I don't mind that. If it fails, it's on me. I can take that. That's motivating. That's exciting. And I also believe in myself and the people that I work with that we can execute these things. So, but it's what happens is if you run a business like that, you create a bottleneck. Like I even went through this when I was editing the special. When we were editing the special, I edited it with Mark and Shifty, who are absolutely brilliant. And we sat in there and we edited. It took us 1 day for each minute of the special. So for 160 seconds, it took us a day of editing. And we did that until it was done. Now, nobody's edited a comedy special like this because usually the editor is so far removed from the comic, or it's already with another production company, or it's already at one of these streaming things. But for me, in order for it to be as good and as nuanced and as beautiful as it is, in order for me to take you into the room, we needed to edit it that way. Like, we were watching horror movies to see how they built tension and then released it.
Yeah.
Because that's comedy. It's tension and release. So if you have slow pushes while you're building the tension and then removal when it's released, or like you zoom out when it's released, it's like, okay, let's use that. Let's apply that. How can we make you feel the tension that you won't feel because you're watching it through a screen? How can we bring you into the room? So that's something you do.
That's interesting. So did you focus in while you were building the tension and then snap out?
Sometimes.
Why did you decide? That's very interesting, because that actually corresponds to different hemispheric function. So the left hemisphere zooms in and the right hemisphere zooms out, and that the right hemisphere is responsible for insight and the left hemisphere for detailed processing. And so you seem to have intuited something like that in that editing process. That's very cool. So you zoom in, and then when the punchline hits, you can snap to a broader perspective.
We'll often hit a punchline on a zoom in, but sometimes a punchline is a misdirection. And by zooming in, immediately we would be telegraphing it. So what we would do is leave it in, let's say, a cowboy shot or something like this, so we could catch you off guard, because catching you off guard is very important, right? But maybe on a big laugh, we let the room breathe. We were able to show the audience laughing as well. I think there's a communal aspect. When you're at a comedy club, you see other people laughing, and that's beautiful. It's cathartic. You're like, okay, I'm free. I can let loose here. So we wanted to show shots where other people were laughing, so you felt comfortable. You could get caught up in that momentum. So it's like approaching the editing process with the same passion, love, and creativity that we approached writing the jokes and creating the show.
Yeah, well, that definitely one of the things that stand-up comedians are doing is providing a communal theater for free play. And it's definitely free because you can't compel someone to laugh. You can't even compel yourself to laugh, not genuinely. It has to be, it has to come from the source, right? It either strikes you as funny before you think, or it's not funny at all. And there is something, I think, extremely stress relieving to be among a lot of other people who are laughing at the same thing, because it means you're all you're all playing spontaneously together without fear. And that's almost like the definition of no stress.
Exactly. And one of the things that we like specifically did, like I would say that my audience is by far the most diverse audience in stand-up. Now, the advantage of that is, and one of the things that I learned is I was going through stand-up, and I like to make fun of everybody because I'm curious about everybody. And I learn these things about people that I think are like really funny. So when I organize them into jokes, I also like to talk about it. It doesn't only have to be like me. I'm not very self-centered with my comedy, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but I'd like talking about topics, other people, cultures, etc. These things are all interesting to me. But what I realized is we were going through this very like woke time where a white dude, a straight white dude like me making fun of, somebody from Ethiopia might be crazy, right? But what I realized is if that Ethiopian person was there and I'm talking to them and doing the joke to them and they're laughing, nobody can be offended.
Yeah. Yeah. Russell Peters does that very well. I mean,
brilliantly.
He's great at it, man, because he's an equal opportunity offender. And his audiences and it's so interesting to watch his audiences because you can almost feel the tension in the different ethnic groups in the audience waiting for their chance to be made fun of. And
they want it.
It's because I think at a deep level, they want to show that they can play along with the joke, that
Two things. They want to play along and they want to show they can, but they also like representation in a creative, clever way.
Yeah.
So like, this is something I learned without realizing, but like I would do these jokes about random groups, right? That just, knowledge that I picked up over the years. And then because the internet exists in these echo chambers, those jokes will go viral in those communities.
Right.
So the Bosnian community would hear about a joke I did about some Bosnians in St. Louis. There's a big Bosnian community there, but it would go crazy viral, not only here, but in the Bosnian communities, but in like Bosnia. And the beauty of this is they felt represented not in a hacky way. They felt represented in a cool way. They didn't know that people knew this about them. They thought it was just their community. And then they're seeing it on a YouTube page with millions of views and the world is laughing at it as well, laughing at something they might be proud of, and they're cool with being represented in that way.
Yeah.
When you do that, the community wants to share it. They want to be part of it.
Yeah.
They feel like you care about them enough.
It's an invitation to the universal table in some sense, right? It's a place where everybody... And that's what is so wonderful about stand-up comedy. It's like a music concert, right? It's the same sort of thing, is that people can go there and enjoy something spontaneously, communally, and play together. And I'm really happy, by the way, about this insight about play. I think if you had to set the world up and you wanted to figure out what the best story you could possibly tell is, that would be an antidote to the depredations of power. It does seem to me that a story about play is the right one, because there's nothing more fun than that. What are we going to do this weekend?
What are we going to do this weekend? What are people around the world going to do this weekend?
Exactly. They're going to play with death.
They're going to play with the most terrifying thing in the world.
Yeah.
Right? The most offensive costumes, but also the idea of death is which spawned it. We need it. And I got to give Louis C.K. credit on this, but like, Louis he was talking about comedy, and it's like making offensive jokes has existed for centuries. It would have been weeded out if there wasn't something that we needed, if there wasn't some catharsis in it. The idea of Halloween, like playing with death, is crazy if you really think about it, especially for earlier societies. The most terrifying thing in the world, to just dabble with it and joke with it and scare people. We need it. We want that release. We want that play.
Well, the alternative is to run in terror from it and hide. And all that does, the thing about that is all it does is make it worse.
Yeah.
And so I think, here's another way of thinking about it. So when I was training people who were agoraphobic to get back on elevators, let's say, we basically did that by playing. And so the way it would work was, all right, I'm afraid of this elevator. I can't get on this elevator. I'll have a panic attack. My heart rate will go up to 150 beats per minute. I think I'm going to die. I'm going to make a fool of myself. It's just, I'm going to want to go to the emergency room. It's going to be humiliating and dangerous. It's just a catastrophe. It's death. I had a client who actually said when the elevator's doors opened, she said, that's a tomb. And so she was afraid of dying in there. And so in a sense, what we would do is play, because I would say, well, you can't get on the elevator. She said, that's right. And I said, well, can you look at a picture of an elevator in a magazine? It's like, well, I think I could do that. And so that's on the edge of play, right? It's like, well, it's a bit challenging and it's a bit threatening, but I could do it. And then maybe you have the person go out in the hallway and, they can walk within 40 feet of the elevator. And so you find that line, it's a line, right, where the person is willing to walk up to that line and then one step farther. And that's really, again, what you're doing when you're telling a joke. You're finding that line and then you're walking one step farther. And you manifest that spirit of play. And it helps expose people to the things they don't want to think about.
In a safe environment. It exposes them in a safe way.
Yeah.
Right? Because we all know that we're playing. It's just like, it's like flirting. You flirting with a girl or you flirting with a guy. Flirting is finding that line of what is polite and then being funny enough to go a little bit past it. And now everybody's in that little naughty territory.
Yeah.
It's still safe because we're playing. It's not like you're coming on too strong or like grabbing people or anything like that. You're being naughty. You're flirting. You're like, yeah, what if we were married? Where would we go on vacation? And the girl's like, what are you talking about? I just met you. What do you mean we're married? And now we're creating this hypothetical scenario where we're both dancing the dance. And it's safe because it's play, but we're able to access.
I think that's also how women evaluate men while they're dancing. Is like, well, can you play, right? Are you all hands? Are you too, dead set on your instrumental goal? Or can you control yourself well enough to play? And it's got to be, to dance properly is to be in that flirtatious zone, exactly. And that also indicates that you're responding to the cues that the other person is putting out there in the most accurate possible way. Right now, you're going to be pushing slightly because you want to find out where the boundary is. And that's partly what makes it exciting. But if you're just rampaging in past all the boundaries, then you're just a dimwit and maybe a dangerous one. So,
and that's the problem with politics is there's no play. It's boring. It's binary. There's no fun whatsoever. Everything that you say can get you canceled for this or canceled with that. Nobody's just allowing it to just play. And I will give Trump credit in this regard.
Yeah.
He was just up there playing. Like, he didn't give a f. He's like, I'm going to make fun of this guy for being short. I'm going to make fun of this person for killing everybody. I'm going to make fun of everybody on the stage. And people reacted to play. They also reacted to him speaking on things that their fringe groups cared about, but there was an element of play.
Yeah, I was given a book, and unfortunately I didn't keep it, which was a big mistake, which was someone had published quite a beautiful book. It looked like a kind of a leather-bound library copy, a classic book. It was the collected poetry of Donald Trump. And what they had done was taken his tweets and turned them into poems, page after page. And I got to tell you, man, they were hilariously funny.
It's funny.
It was unbelievably funny. He's unbelievably caustically witty.
Yep.
And well, and that was certainly one of his charming features. That ability to play.
They're like Megyn Kelly, and shout out Megyn. I love Megyn, but Megyn Kelly goes, "You've called women pigs and you've called women ogres or something like that," and he was like, "Just Rosie O'Donnell." That's a funny, playful thing to say on the world stage. You know what I mean? Calling what's her face Pocahontas is funny. Like, it exposed politics in a lot of way, because if somebody's having fun, that's infectious, especially if they're having fun around everyone else who is not. You've been at these stuffy dinners. I'm sure they invite you all the time. And there is a table that's laughing and goofing around and it is impossible not to look over at it. It's impossible not to see what's happening over. Where is this fun? And why are you guys having so much fun? You enjoying yourselves?
So I have a theory of leadership, and you tell me what you think about this. So imagine that all leaders are confronting dragons of one sort or another. Okay, now the question is, are you the man for that dragon? because some of them are large enough to burn you very rapidly to a crisp. And so you might say, well, how do we judge that? How do we know if you're the knight for that particular dragon? And here's a good rule. If you're frightened into paralysis or tempted towards tyranny in your attempts to deal with the dragon, which is, this is so catastrophic that I have to panic and everyone has to listen to exactly what I say, then you're too small for the dragon and you're not the right leader. And so I was thinking about this in relationship to the climate crisis. It's like if carbon dioxide transforms you into a paralyzed tyrant, you're not the right man for the environmental job. And then you might say, well, who would the right man be? And that might be someone who can approach that particular dragon with a certain degree of play.
And what would that be? So give me what is the play? How do we play with the environment?
Well, I would say we at least agree not to put in rules by compulsion.
Yes.
Right? So here's a rule. No rules instituted by compulsion, because it's bad play. It's like, you have to do this. It's like, that's because that's a bad policy. If you can't get me to go along with it willingly, then you're a tyrant. And you think the crisis is so important that you get to be a tyrant, but that just shows that you're not a very good leader.
Yeah.
Yeah, don't you think? I mean, so you don't get to say you have to do this. Not if you're a good leader. You have to say, here's a bunch of reasons. You have to tell a story, back to what we were talking about earlier. I have to tell you a story and you think, yeah, man, I could get on board with that. I'm all in on that. And that's a much better arrangement anyways, because then I don't have to enforce your compliance. You know, you talked about these projects that you were engaged in creatively. If you want them to work, everybody's got to be on board, right? If you're going around hitting people to make them listen to you, then you're almost inevitably dooming the project to failure. Because first of all, they're not going to be all in. And second, they're going to take their revenge where they can get it.
Yes. They have to believe in the project as well. They have to be pot committed as well. They have to believe in you, especially if you're their leader. Yeah, I mean, the dragon metaphor, you can almost see day to day with like bullfighting. I know it's unfair because they stab and wound the bull, etc. But like he's not terrified of the bull running away. He's staring at the bull. He's dancing with the dragon.
Yeah, no kidding. That's for sure. That's what bullfighting is. Exactly. It's playing with death. It's the same as Halloween, man. It's the same thing, to play with death.
So why do we need that? Maybe that's how we understand comedy. Maybe that's how we understand Halloween. Maybe that's how we understand like the darker sides of our nature. And people probably just want to ignore them.
Well,
but maybe
I can give you an example of that. So I was just on the Via Dolorosa with Jonathan Pageau, who's a Greek Orthodox Christian thinker who's also an expert on postmodern theory. And we went to Jerusalem. We did a documentary there, which will be released sometime in the next 6 months. And we walked the 12 Stations of the Cross in Jerusalem. And then we went to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which is founded on the crucifixion spot. And you might say, well, what were we doing? And what is everybody doing who's walking that road? And the answer is, they're playing with tragedy and death.
Interesting.
But that is what's happening. So you imagine that the crucifix itself is a symbol of torturous death. Well, why would people be gazing at it? And the answer is, well, because you have to gaze upon that which frightens and terrifies you, because otherwise you can't master it. And so each of those stations of the cross, which are marked out both mythologically and geographically, because it isn't certain where each of those events occurred, let's say, it's a play. It's a passion play. And the passion is, look, man, sometime you're going to have to die. And sometime you're going to be exposed to betrayal. And sometimes you're going to be under the thumb of a tyrant. And sometime you're going to be questioned about truth by a moral relativist. And sometimes criminals are going to be preferred to you. That's all going to happen to you in your life. And you bloody well better get ready for it. And the way you get ready for it is by playing with it.
By playing with it.
You bet, man. That's exactly what's happening in those religious rituals, is it's play with death.
Yeah, it's. I mean, I was there as well. You got to touch the stone, and while I was, what is it? The not anointing stone. What is the stone where Jesus' body was wrapped up?
Yeah, you mean in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre?
Yeah,
right. That's where he was wrapped after the crucifix. Yeah.
And it was a beautiful moment. And I saw people, touching it, and I wanted to touch it, but I also was feeling naughty. I was like, this is such an important place in history. And I was wowed by the fact that I could actually touch this thing where like Jesus' body was also there. But because of those high stakes, I was like, ooh, what's the naughty thing that we could do over here? And I think that dance we have is why theme parks exist. Like, why are we on roller coasters?
Yeah.
We want to face it.
Yeah.
What is that
that's
about
why
us?
we go to horror movies too, which is really a very difficult thing to understand. And it is, the fundamental spirit of religious affirmation, I would say, is to play with catastrophe. Fundamentally, right? And the reason we have to play with catastrophe is because we have to face catastrophe. And so there's all sorts of things we do that appear very strange. Like you said, amusement parks are a good example of that, because they push you to the limits of your physical tolerance. And they do it in a way that is constrained danger. And horror movies obviously do that psychologically.
Yeah, it's like sparring.
Yeah.
Like sparring prepares you for fighting in life, but you do it in a more safe environment.
Yeah.
It allows you to be more calm and comfortable in those circumstances that happen in life that are not going to be calm and comfortable otherwise.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, even you look at like...
That's all part of that dragon confrontation process, is that, you want to find a dragon that's large enough to pose some threat, but that you have a reasonable chance of overcoming. And then what you have is an optimal challenge instead of something that terrifies you. And then you build the challenges across time, and that's what you do as you become competent.
Think about, you've seen the rise in popularity of jiu-jitsu, right?
Yeah.
And obviously we got to give our good friend Joe Rogan credit for this, MMA credit for this, Dana White. But jiu-jitsu is the closest you can come to death while training. Because if somebody chokes you and you don't tap, you just die. Right? You know what I'm saying? Like in boxing, you get knocked out, you get back up. Like it takes a lot of brain trauma with like really small gloves to be killed while you're sparring. I don't think you're getting killed while you're sparring in boxing. You got the headgear, the gloves are much bigger. But in jiu-jitsu, if someone just keeps choking you and there isn't enough oxygen that gets to your brain, you could potentially die. I could see why people like playing with that.
Yeah.
I could see it.
What you find in therapy, it's very, very interesting. There's a large body of research supporting this. So the idea, first of all, was that if you exposed people to things they were afraid of, and you paired that with a relaxation response, they would learn to relax instead of being afraid. Mm-hmm. But then it was rapidly discovered that you didn't have to teach them to relax. And that kind of blew the whole theory, because the theory was they had learned to be afraid and now you were teaching them to relax. It's like, nope, all you have to do is expose them voluntarily and they get better. And then the theory was, well, they'll get better in relationship to the specific thing you're exposing them to, but the symptoms will just crop up somewhere else. And that also but that also proved to be wrong. And it was because, when my client said, this is a tomb when the elevator doors opened, what it showed was she wasn't confronting the elevator. She was confronting her fear of death. And she really was doing that. And what she was learning was that by putting herself in a position where she was confronting the threat of death, she could observe that she could actually handle it. And then she got braver. And that's what happens to people in psychotherapy when you use exposure therapy, is they don't become less afraid. They become braver. And that generalizes. And so what they see is that there's something within them that can overcome even the things they're most afraid of. And that's a good thing to talk about in relationship to Halloween, because, Halloween plays with death and decay and predation and monstrosity and everything that's dark. And it's become an immense holiday. And I think it is because our culture is so sanitized that we take everything that smacks of death away and hide it. And, to some degree, thank God for that. Yeah. But it still presents us with this conundrum, which is, we have to face our finitude and our mortality, and how best to do that. And the answer has to be something like, in a spirit of play. God, it's a hell of a thing to think about when you're thinking about death itself.
But how brave of us to take on the challenge.
Well, that's exactly right, man. And I think that's actually a good question, right? how brave of us? Question mark. And the answer to that might be, well, how brave can you be? And God only knows how brave you can be. Maybe you can be brave enough to play with death.
And this is why discourse has completely fallen apart, because there's no room to play.
Yeah.
There's no room to say the wrong thing. There's no sparring session. There's no Halloween. There's no trying out the jokes, trying out the ideas. It is death. It's not play.
Yeah.
It's not even a practice
Yeah,
realm.
well, that's the problem with cancel culture, you know. Well, I learned years ago when I was lecturing at Harvard, I was talking about very serious things about the Holocaust and about the catastrophes in the Soviet Union and all of that absolute abysmal, hellish mess. And there was a little voice in the back of my head that said, you're too serious about this. If you really mastered it, you could do it in a spirit of play. And I thought, oh my God, really? How can that possibly be when discussing things that seriously? How could you possibly do that in a spirit of play? And the answer would be something like, well, if you really mastered it, you could. And that the mastery would be evident in the fact that you were playing. Now, that didn't really tell me how, right? Because it's still a big problem of how you do that.
Yeah.
But I do believe it's true. I believe it's fundamentally true, is that the mastery that someone demonstrates over a given subject domain is precisely proportionate to the degree that they can do it in the spirit of play.
Yes, 100%. Yeah. How do you play with these dark, tricky topics? I think that was, even with the Kanye thing, I think that was so tricky, is especially with the anti-Semitism that was bubbling out.
Yeah.
I think anti-Semitism is this it's such a unique form of hate because, one, most people are not familiar with Jews. Most people, so if you're not familiar with them, you haven't spoken to them and talked to them about how they react to this. And two, the way that we get taught world history, at least in America, is that Germany was regular, and then all of a sudden one day they just started hating Jews, and then they were putting them in concentration camps. We don't get taught what Hitler used and Goebbels used to build up the resentment for the Jews. That's not really spoken about to us. So I think when the Jews hear these things they run the media, they run the banks, it's red flag. It goes, this is how it starts. It's happening. And then when non-Jews hear it, they go, well, those sound like some pretty cool stereotypes. I mean, imagine someone like a black friend of mine who wears glasses even though he doesn't have a prescription, so people think he's less threatening when he's walking down the street. Imagine his reaction to hearing the stereotype, own the banks, run the media, own sports teams. He's going, give me those stereotypes right now, because he's unfamiliar with what those stereotypes lead to. So there's this huge chasm with understanding the hate of a group of people and how those things, which seem complementary, they seem fucking aspirational. You want to be able to be in power positions, because we haven't been taught that those are the things that first are said before you dehumanize a group of people and then kill 6 million of them.
Yeah, well, part of the problem with the discourse about the Jewish minority is that Jews are disproportionately successful for all sorts of reasons, and so that fact easily feeds into conspiratorial thinking, right? Partly because minorities are annoying, but they're not nearly as annoying when they're unsuccessful, because at least they can, what would you call, atone for the sin of being a minority by being oppressed and miserable. And so that's, a positive thing. But if they're successful, then they're really annoying. It's because not only are they a minority, but, it's easy to become envious. And then it's also easy to presume that it's some sort of conspiratorial practice on the part of that minority that's giving them an advantage over, you who's striving ahead so nobly.
You're giving a hypothetical to how the majority sees minorities, not how you see minorities.
Yes, I'm glad you picked that up. Yes. Very astute of you. Hopefully the listeners and watchers will have done the same thing.
I can see it clipped. Look, minorities are annoying, but especially the rich ones.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
Yeah. You can be sure the Young Turks are going to clip that out.
But yes. Yeah, I see. Yeah, I don't know. I just see it. I saw it kind of happening in real time. And
I'm planning to talk to him soon, I think.
Say again?
I'm planning to talk to Kanye soon, I think.
And what are your thoughts about that? Have you had? Yeah, what is your thinking with that?
Well, I'd like to find out what's going on. I mean, he's a stunningly creative person, and he seems like a bit too much of a treasure just to throw in the dustbin. You know,
Right.
Obviously he's got his problems like most people do. And the thing about geniuses is they have lots of problems, just like ordinary people, but they're also geniuses.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes,
well,
I
that's a
think
good thing to keep in mind.
I think that Kanye's genius, outside of music, I think he's an incredibly gifted producer, but I think Kanye's genius is his ability to influence. And then the genius of influence seeps into industries that are completely subjective. Fashion is nothing. Fashion is, if you can get the most influential people to wear a garbage bag, that is cool now. Things go in and out of style. Skinny jeans are cool, then baggy jeans become cool.
Yeah.
There's not a specific cut that makes them good
Yeah, well,
or bad.
there's an edge, you know, just like the edge we were talking about in comedy. And fashion
Absolutely.
imagine there's a social hierarchy.
Yep.
Fashion goes from the top down. It even happens
Yep.
with names. And so there's a standard trajectory of names. The aristocracy picks names, whatever the aristocracy happens to be. Then those names
Yep.
become popularized till everyone has them. Then they go
Yep.
out of fashion, and then they disappear for a number of generations. And then the
Yes.
aristocracy rediscovers them, and the names cascade down the hierarchy again. Fashion is all about being on the edge, just like comedy, right? It's like,
Yes.
are you with it? Are you awake? Are you on the cutting edge? And that changes
being
where
on-
the edge is.
Exactly. Because, and I would say it doesn't start at the top of the aristocracy, but I'm just, we're just pulling, what is it? I'm nitpicking, whatever. But essentially fashion, what is cool is a rejection of what is popular. Cool will always be the rejection of popular.
Right.
So what happens is the skinny jeans become ubiquitous, and then you start seeing them in the mall stores.
Yes,
and
exactly.
then there's a
Target.
There's exactly. Target has them. And then there's a small group of like cool kids that exists in a few different areas that start rejecting the norm even before they're in Target.
Yeah.
Those kids, once the thing is in Target, because they're such, I don't want to say devil's advocates or counterculture, whatever it is, those kids are the real influencers. They get copied by a guy like Kanye, and then Kanye's influence puts his clothing on a bunch of other famous people who have influence, and then it trickles down to me, other people, etc.
Yeah,
and now all of a sudden
that's
we're
right.
changing out our
Well,
skinny
those
jeans.
kids, the influencers that you're talking about, those are the aristocracy among their age group. They're the creative
that's
kids that
fair.
are on the edge.
No, that's fair. That's fair.
Yeah.
Within their peer group, they're the coolest, or they're the outsiders that nobody thinks is. No, they're probably the coolest. Let's
Yeah.
say they're the coolest. But
Yeah, well,
what I
if
think is interesting
if you've got it exactly right, you can be cool and an outsider at the same time, and
At the
that's a
same
real
time.
artist, right? I mean,
Yeah.
yeah. So, all right,
Yeah.
we should stop because we've been going for quite a long time. It's
go.
It's been a pleasure to talk to you. I should let everybody watching and listening know that I'm going to talk to Andrew for another half an hour behind the Daily Wire Plus platform. We're going to talk more biographically. I want to find out exactly how he shaped his career. Hello, everyone. I would encourage you to continue listening to my conversation with my guest on dailywireplus.com.